The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the Swedish sky in hues of orange and purple as a group of teenagers ventured into Dalby Forest. Laughter and easy conversation echoed through the ancient trees, the kind of carefree noise that belongs to youth. They were looking for a bit of adventure, a story to tell, something to break the monotony of their small town. The forest, with its dense canopy and winding paths, seemed like the perfect backdrop. For the first hour, everything was exactly as they'd hoped. The air was crisp and cool, filled with the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. They pointed out strangely shaped trees and joked about getting lost, completely unaware of how prophetic those words would become. It started subtly, a feeling so slight that most of them dismissed it at first. It was that primal sensation, the one that makes the hairs on your arms stand up, the feeling of being watched. One of them, a boy named Eric, stopped and glanced over his shoulder. He saw nothing but the deepening shadows between the thick trunks of the trees. He shrugged it off, attributing it to the eerie twilight atmosphere, and jogged to catch up with his friends. But the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it intensified, spreading like a contagion through the group. The easy chatter died down, replaced by a tense, watchful silence. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed amplified in the quiet. Then came the footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, and undeniably not from one of them. A slow, rhythmic crunching of leaves and soil that seemed to follow just behind their path. When they stopped, the footsteps stopped. When they started walking again, so did the unseen follower. They'd spin around, hearts pounding, flashlights cutting through the gloom. But the forest remained still and empty. There was no one there. The path behind them was always vacant, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Panic began to weave its insidious threads through the group. Whispers replaced their earlier laughter. "Did you hear that? It's right behind us. What is it?" The sounds grew closer, bolder. It was no longer just footsteps. Now there was a distinct dragging noise, as if something heavy was being pulled across the forest floor. The sound was methodical, slow, and terrifyingly persistent. It was close enough now that they could almost feel the vibrations through the soles of their shoes. They quickened their pace, breaking into a nervous jog, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The forest, which had seemed so inviting just an hour before, now felt like a labyrinth designed to trap them. Every tree looked the same. Every path seemed to lead deeper into the suffocating darkness. They were lost, and they were not alone. The sense of being watched was now an oppressive weight, a physical pressure on their backs. They felt eyes on them from every direction, from behind every tree and in every shadow. They huddled closer together, a small island of trembling fear in a vast, hostile wilderness. The air grew colder, an unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the setting sun. The sounds were all around them now, a symphony of terror. The heavy footsteps, the dragging noise, and now a low, guttural breathing that seemed to come from just over their shoulders. It was the sound of a large animal, yet it was distinctly wrong. It was too deep, too resonant, too intelligent. One of the girls, Maya, let out a strangled scream. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with terror. "Something touched me," she whispered. her voice trembling so hard she could barely form the words. She pointed to her shoulder, where her jacket was slightly indented, as if a heavy hand had just rested there. But there was nothing. The space around her was empty. That was the moment the fragile dam of their composure finally broke. The unseen touch was the final confirmation that this wasn't their imagination. This was real. As if in response to Maya's cry, a new sound ripped through the night air. It was a growl, but not like any animal they had ever heard. It was a deep, guttural rumble that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. It was a sound of pure malice, of ancient hunger, and it was horrifyingly close. It came from the dense thicket of trees right beside them, a spot they had scanned with their flashlights only seconds before and found empty. The growl was a predator's warning, a promise of violence. It was the sound of something that had been patiently stalking them, toying with them, and was now finally revealing its presence. Absolute, primal terror took over. There was no plan, no communication, just a singular, shared instinct. Run. They scattered in a blind panic, sprinting through the undergrowth, branches whipping at their faces, thorns tearing at their clothes. They didn't care where they were going. They just needed to get away from that sound, away from that feeling, away from the unseen thing that hunted them in the dark. Sobs and desperate cries for help mingled with the sound of their frantic footsteps crashing through the forest. Behind them, the heavy, dragging footsteps quickened, easily keeping pace. The deep growl echoed through the trees, seeming to come from all directions at once, mocking their feeble attempt to escape. They ran without direction, fueled by adrenaline and sheer terror. The forest became a blur of dark shapes and menacing shadows. More than once, they stumbled and fell, scrambling back to their feet with scraped hands and knees, their hearts hammering against their ribs. They could still hear it, a constant, terrifying presence just beyond the reach of their light. It never showed itself, never gave them a form to fear. It remained a creature of sound and sensation, a phantom that existed only in the space just behind them, in the cold spot on their shoulder, in the growl that promised a terrible end. This was its power, its greatest weapon, the terror of the unknown. Finally, through a break in the trees, they saw it, the faint glow of streetlights, the edge of the forest. Hope surged through them, giving their exhausted legs a final burst of strength. They burst out of the tree line and onto the familiar gravel road, collapsing onto the ground, gasping for air, chests heaving. They were scratched, bruised, and covered in dirt, but they were out. They were safe. They turned, their flashlights cutting shaky beams back into the dark maw of the forest. The woods stood silent and still. The footsteps had stopped. The growling was gone. The oppressive presence had vanished, as if it had never been there. The Dalby Spook, the unseen entity of the forest, had claimed another story, but had allowed its players to escape. They looked at each other, the shared horror reflected in their eyes. They had survived, but they knew they would never forget the night they were hunted by something that refused to be seen. The forest kept its secret, and they were left with a story that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. Thank you for watching. If you have your own stories about unexplained encounters, share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe out there.